Anxiety and depression. Two words that carry weight, silence, and for many, shame. In today's world, these conditions are often treated like glitches in the system, chemical imbalances, malfunctions of the mind. We are taught to suppress them, distract ourselves, medicate, and move on. But what if these experiences are not errors? What if they are signals? What if, buried within the chaos of anxiety and the heaviness of depression, lies a message that we were never taught to hear? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, had a radical view, one that challenges everything we have been told about mental suffering. He believed anxiety and depression were not signs of weakness, but invitations, not enemies to defeat, but messengers from the soul. They arise not just from trauma or stress, but from a profound misalignment between our inner truth and the life we are living. Jung's forgotten psychological fix does not begin with a diagnosis or a prescription. It begins with a question. Who are you, really? Not the mask you wear in public, not the identity you crafted to be loved or accepted or successful, but the self that whispers when the world goes quiet, the one that aches when you betray your own values, the one that dreams even when you stop listening. You see, Jung believed that every person has a shadow, a part of themselves that contains everything they have denied, repressed, or ignored. This shadow is not evil. It is simply the parts of you that you were told were unacceptable. Your anger, your sadness, your fears, your desires. Over time, we push these things into the unconscious. We smile when we want to scream. We people please instead of speaking our truth. We chase status instead of purpose. And the more we disconnect from who we are, the more the unconscious fights back. That fight often feels like anxiety. It feels like a racing heart, a mind you cannot slow down, an invisible panic that lives beneath the surface. Or it feels like depression, numbness, exhaustion, hopelessness. Life loses color. Days blur together. Nothing feels real. But Jung would say this is not your body betraying you. It is your soul demanding to be heard. He once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, the pain you cannot explain is often the life you are forced to accept. The patterns you repeat are the parts of you still trapped in the past. Healing, then, is not about fixing the symptoms. It is about uncovering what they are pointing toward. This is where Jung's method becomes truly revolutionary. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of my anxiety?" he would ask, "What is my anxiety asking of me? What have I been avoiding? What truth am I afraid to face? What part of me needs to be reclaimed?" This is not easy work. Jung called it the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your true self. It requires honesty. It requires courage. It means turning inward, even when everything in the modern world tells you to stay distracted. It means sitting with the discomfort, not to wallow in it, but to listen to it. Take a person who is constantly anxious in relationships. The modern mind might say, "You have attachment issues. Meditate, take a pill, set boundaries." But Jung would ask, where did this fear of abandonment come from? Who was the first person to teach you that love was conditional? What part of you still believes you are not worthy of connection, or someone who is depressed after achieving success? Society tells them to be grateful, to push harder. But Jung would say, perhaps your depression is a sign that the life you built is not actually yours. Perhaps your soul is rebelling against a path that no longer fits. Jung believed depression was not always a disorder. Sometimes it was a natural and necessary pause, a collapse of the old self so that a more authentic self could emerge. He compared it to the cocoon before transformation, a place of darkness that is not death, but metamorphosis. In his own life, Jung experienced a deep psychological crisis that lasted years. He called it a confrontation with the unconscious. During that time, he withdrew from the outside world and turned inward. He painted, he wrote, he dreamed. And through this journey, he discovered not madness, but meaning. He emerged not broken, but whole. What he found is what so many of us are missing today: a deeper conversation with ourselves, not the surface-level affirmations, not the endless self-improvement loops, but a true meeting with the shadow, a reconciliation with the parts of ourselves we were told to exile. Anxiety and depression, in Jung's eyes, are not just symptoms to silence, they are doorways, and behind them is the life you are meant to live. Most people are terrified of meeting themselves. That is the root of it. We are conditioned from a young age to perform, to conform, to be palatable. Quiet the anger, hide the sadness, dim the ambition. And so, a split occurs. There is the face we show the world, and there is everything underneath. Jung called these the persona and the shadow. The persona is your social mask. The shadow is what the mask hides. The more you identify with your persona, the more disconnected you become from your inner world. Eventually, the split becomes unbearable. That is when anxiety creeps in. That is when depression anchors itself in your chest. These are not random conditions. They are responses, signals from within that the self you present and the self you possess are drifting apart. Healing does not mean eliminating these feelings. It means making the unconscious conscious. That is Jung's forgotten fix. A deeper kind of therapy, not the kind that just helps you function, but the kind that helps you become whole. Let us say you feel constantly anxious at work. You wake up dreading the day. Your chest is tight before meetings. You feel like you're performing, not living. In the modern framework, you might be told to practice mindfulness, or take breaks, or adjust your workload. Jung would not oppose those things, but he would ask something more piercing. Whose expectations are you trying to live up to? Whose voice are you obeying? And at what cost? You may realize the anxiety comes from betraying your creativity, from silencing your intuition, from chasing security over meaning. The job is not just stressful, it is soul-suffocating, and your unconscious is screaming for oxygen. That scream feels like anxiety. But the message is not "you are weak," it is "you are misaligned." Or take someone who feels a heavy, unshakable depression. They are successful, they are loved. On the outside, everything looks perfect, but inside they feel nothing, a dull ache, a tiredness that sleep cannot fix. That is not laziness, that is not ungratefulness. Jung would call it a spiritual problem, a deep misconnection with the self. You can only pretend for so long. You can only numb for so many years. The psyche knows, the soul remembers. And when the life you are living becomes too far from the life you need, depression comes like a fog, not to punish you, but to stop you, to slow you down, to make you listen. That is why Jung called depression a guest. It is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It says, sit down, look inward. Something is dying, an identity, a belief, a role. Let it die, because what comes next is not your end, it is your beginning. Jung's method is not about constant happiness. It is about authenticity. And authenticity is not always pleasant. It requires shadow work, meeting the parts of yourself you have hidden, the rage, the envy, the shame, the desires you were told were wrong, the dreams you abandoned for safety. Most people run from this confrontation. But what you do not face controls you. What you avoid becomes your prison. Jung knew this. That is why he encouraged a lifelong relationship with the unconscious, through dreams, through art, through honest reflection. Not to decode the mind like a machine, but to engage with it like a mystery. In a world that values surface over depth, Jung's ideas can feel almost rebellious. We are taught to optimize, to manage, to improve. But he asked us to descend, to fall into ourselves, to walk into the darkness, not to get lost, but to find what we left behind. And this is the paradox of Jung's fix. It is not a fix at all. It is not a quick solution. It is not a 5-step plan. It is a path, a journey, one that requires you to trust that your symptoms have something to say, that the very things you are trying to escape, your panic, your sadness, your confusion, may be the guides that lead you back to who you were always meant to be. In Jungian terms, healing is not about returning to some previous state of wholeness. It is about integrating all the parts you rejected. The process may begin in suffering, but it ends in transformation. You become not someone new, but someone true. That is what the modern world misses. We want fast results, instant relief, constant positivity. But Jung taught us that the soul moves differently. It unfolds in layers. It speaks in symbols. It waits until we are ready to stop performing and start listening. So, if you are anxious, do not just reach for the nearest distraction. Ask, what am I running from? If you are depressed, do not just label yourself as broken. Ask, what needs to be released, grieved, or reclaimed? Because when you stop fighting your emotions and start interpreting them, they become something else. They become maps. They become mirrors. They become medicine. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be found. And the person who finds you is you. The most profound truth Carl Jung ever shared was this: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege requires descent, not into despair, but into depth, into the unlit corridors of your own psyche, where the child you once were still waits, where the anger you repressed still burns, where the dreams you shelved still whisper. We think healing is about rising above, about conquering pain. But Jung showed us that it is about diving beneath, because the soul does not speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in feelings, in discomfort. Your anxiety is not just a malfunction. It is a message wrapped in urgency. Your depression is not just darkness. It is a cocoon preparing you for transformation, if you listen. So how do you begin? Not by pretending everything is okay, not by layering affirmations over wounds. You begin by sitting with what is real, by writing the words you are afraid to say, by naming the feeling instead of numbing it. You begin with shadow work, not to become perfect, but to become whole. This work is slow, and often it is invisible. The world may not notice when you finally grieve the thing you never mourned. No one applauds when you choose rest instead of performance, when you let go of an identity that once protected you. But you will notice, something inside you will shift. You will stop feeling like a stranger in your own body. You will stop negotiating with your own voice. Jung believed that neurosis, what we often call mental illness, was, at its core, the suffering of a soul that has not discovered its meaning. In other words, the pain persists when we live without purpose, without integration, without truth. We keep trying to be what the world rewards, and we forget to be what the soul requires. That is why you can do everything right. Eat clean, work out, achieve success, stay positive, and still feel like something is missing. Because the soul does not care about appearances. It cares about alignment. It does not care if you look happy. It cares if you are real. And the truth is, there is no external solution for an internal fracture. You can change cities, jobs, relationships, but if the fracture is within, the pain will follow. Not because you are cursed, not because you are broken, but because the soul does not give up on you. It will keep speaking until you listen, even if its voice sounds like anxiety, even if it disguises itself as depression. The world does not teach us how to listen to the soul. It teaches us how to silence it, through productivity, through perfectionism, through performance. But Jung invites us to a different kind of life, one rooted not in image, but in depth, one where healing is not a destination, but a continual conversation with the self. To follow this path is not easy. It means making unpopular choices, saying no to the roles you once played, creating boundaries where there were none, being misunderstood. It means letting go of what is familiar but false, in favor of what is unknown but true. But the reward? You stop living on the surface. You stop chasing things that were never meant for you. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop being haunted by your own silence, and you begin, truly begin, to live. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly, with your whole self, shadow and light, wound and wisdom, not because you have fixed yourself, but because you finally chose to meet yourself. That is Carl Jung's forgotten fix, a return to the self beneath the noise. A radical realignment with the truth that lives in your body, your dreams, your fear, your longing. It will not always be pretty, but it will always be real. And real is where healing lives.